Games don't need to be challenging to give you a wonderful experience, and I think Kirby 64 The Crystal Shards is a great example of that. The stages are straightforward, none of the enemies pose real threats, and I'll bet my right kidney that you're never going to run into its game over screen. But even with a total lack of tense moments or even conflict in general, I still can't help but love this game. It does so much right to a point where I never run into any bumpy roads during playthroughs. Many games that have really easy difficulties suffer hugely, and that's mainly because there's no self-awareness. HAL Labs knows that Kirby is easy peasy lemon squeezy. I heard that line in the Shia LaBeouf movie about golfing.
Hi. Yeah, a bunch of us went down to the beach, and we got there, and the Coast Guard's running all up and down the sand, like, you can't get in the water, you know, screaming at us. So we waited a bit, and they went further down the beach, and then we decided we would go, like, what the fuck?
Because Kirby is built to be a game that almost anyone can finish, they constantly make mechanics and visuals to keep the player on a smooth and comfy road. The gameplay is dynamic enough that I never catch myself just sleepwalking and pressing buttons without thinking. Crystal Shards is definitely a game that got more flack from critics than the others in the series because they thought it was a bit gay, but to me it's one of the most unique and fun games in the whole franchise. To first understand the development of this game, you have to understand the 64DD. Essentially, Nintendo realized they dropped the biggest ball in existence by still using cartridges for their N64 instead of CD-ROMs. So they were going to make this disk drive thing to try and put a band-aid on it. If you look, most huge first-party titles were going to be on this thing, including a game called Kirby's Air Ride from HAL Labs and Sakurai. However, every time it looked like the DD was going to get released, Nintendo would delay it, giving every developer the worst case of blue balls in history. Eventually, after all the delay with the DD, Air Ride was just cancelled. HAL Labs just thought, well, okay, what can we do now? This thing is obviously never coming out. So they decided to just play it safe and make a nice traditional 2D platforming game with some nice polygonal visual sex. I imagine some people would be a bit upset that they didn't put Kirby in a completely 3D world, but Kirby would be fucking stupid in 3D. Imagine how lame the cutter ability would be, or the idea of the fireball going 5 centimeters and covering precisely 4% of the game field, causing every enemy to not even notice my poor attempt at killing them. The fun of Kirby comes from using the powers, and most of them just wouldn't translate well into a 3D space. I'm not saying they couldn't do it. Actually wait, yes I am! Because they tried it later during the GameCube era, and after around what I theorized would have been around 2 weeks of development, HAL ended up thinking it was an abomination and scrapped it. In hindsight, having Crystal Shards in 2D was a great idea for multiple reasons. One, they already knew what to do. Kirby has been in 2D for years, so they don't have to worry about wasting their budget on stuff that would end up not working and trying desperately to develop new mechanics so they can force Kirby into an environment he doesn't belong in the first place. 2, because they didn't have to waste time completely changing the foundation of a game where you play as a pink buff ball who makes baby noises. The development team got to relax a bit and focus on making the game really visually appealing. They could also put as much detail as they wanted into these 3D backgrounds because they weren't limited by thinking about the player visiting them. 3! Having it in 2D means you don't have to deal with pulling an anchor around so you can get the fucking horrific N64 camera to position itself well so Kirby can suck up a Waddle Dee. One thing to note about this game is that Sakurai didn't work on it. He was too busy with Super Smash Cast 64 to give a fuck about Kirby at this moment. He didn't give a fuck! So he sent HAL Labs an audio cassette of him blowing himself from all the money he was making, and they used it as King DDD. In fact, Sakurai didn't play or even see the game until it was released. Instead, the game was headed by Shinichi Shimomura, who also directed Dreamlands 2 and 3. Many fans lump Crystal Shards together with Dreamlands 2 and 3 to form an unofficial trilogy called the Dark Matter Trilogy, as these three games share many themes and characters that only appear in them and nowhere else in the series. Even though a lot of people might be upset that Sakurai didn't have any hand in Crystal Shards, Shimomura did a great job, and I think his style of game design was perfect for it. In every Kirby game, the fundamental mechanic existing throughout all of them is his ability to eat an enemy and gain their power, which you can then use around the level. This game unsurprisingly still has that, but you can now press one of the camera buttons to have Kirby hold his new power. This mechanic allows him to throw it at another enemy, and if they have an ability as well, the two powers will fuse together into this little star design which you can then swallow. Doing this will grant Kirby a unique power from the combination. I know that sounds a little bit convoluted, so let me make it a little easier for you to understand. You know how you wake up every morning and get a sausage, egg, and cheese sandwich at McDonald's and they give you a side of hash browns? Well, it's really hard to take one bite out of the sandwich and then another out of the hash brown. So you just put that shit together and it ends up being better than the sum of its parts. Well, that's what Kirby's doing. He's putting his hash brown in his McGriddles. It takes a little to get used to, but I think after you've done it a couple times, you'll have the whole thing down and it'll become second nature. Like hash brown McGriddles. There's so much fun in just discovering all the combinations. Some of my favorites would be mixing fire and cutter. This is one of the first combinations you run into in the game, and I feel like they did that for a reason. It has some nice detail put into it, and it allows you to do a couple different things, like holding it up, throwing it, swinging it around, and wave turning.
This is my advanced technique. Turn around. Oh yeah. That's my aw.
Ice and Cutter is another great one. This gives Kirby some ice skates, and I love how they have momentum built into them. You can end up moving pretty quickly on these, and I always have a fun time whenever I get them. I think the combination that stands out the most, though, has to be Ice and Electric. Having this one turns Kirby into a fridge that dispenses unlimited food. What makes this so fun for me is that they actually took some time to make completely new art assets for the food just to show this power. All of the combinations end up making a total of 34. The only problem is that a lot of the powers have so much cooldown once I cancel them, and if I'm going to be using them frequently, having to wait nearly a full second to be able to move again just kills me. The Snow Bomb combo is especially irritating. This Isis Snowman pisses me the fuck off. Whenever I run into something, it kills all my forward momentum and joy. Ah, fuck. Ah, fuck. I'm trying to play Kirby, not stay hard in your mom's mouth. Some of the stacked powers are pretty lame also. Stuff like the bomb turning into missiles is pretty great, but then you get shit like, ooh, let's take the normal fireball and make it a bigger fireball. Fuck you. This mechanic is amazing though, and I don't mean to put it down much at all. If they brought this back in the next game, I'd be insanely excited for it. There's so much you can do with this concept, and it allows for a lot of expanding. One thing that makes me so mad is that I can't exit my crouch on frame 1. The developers should have known how important this is. If I can't act immediately out of my crouch, that means I'm unable to do a double crouch. Can you believe that shit? If I can't double crouch, that means I'm unable to dance to the music when I'm bored as fuck. Kirby just feels a little sluggish in general, actually. It definitely takes a couple frames for him to do most of his actions. This is generally one of the negatives of having smoother and more complex animations in a game. You end up having to cut off control for a split second so that the animation can really start up. It's a decision you have to make on if you prefer your game being more movement-based or having to focus more on making the character animations look smooth. Some developers are okay with sacrificing a bit of that so that the character can look more natural. While this can be forgiven a little bit due to this game's context, I mean, there's not really many parts where I'm in the middle of a bukkake and I have to make frame-perfect pivots or some shit. But it just makes Kirby slightly less fun to play as, and while you may think, well, it's just a couple frames, does it really make that much of a difference? Just play Crystal Shards for a bit and then play Sakurai Superstar. You'll notice a difference when it comes to Kirby's response time. A couple frames may not seem like much, but it really does make a difference on how much control the audience has over the character. Shinushi Shimamura seemed to like Kirby being more leisurely and relaxing, and wasn't really concerned about Kirby's movement or how responsive he was. But I would definitely be a much bigger fan of this game if they just cut down Kirby's lag. As it is, I still think Kirby controls manageably, but even cutting all his actions down by just 2 or 3 frames would make a big difference. The stages all have so much variety in 64, and it's one of the best things about it. When you finish the first world, Popstar, and end up at a desert planet, right away you expect the worst shit ever. Like you just beat the only world with diversity, and now you have to suffer through theme-based worlds, which are nothing more than an excuse to use the same boring and characterless assets throughout consecutive levels, but then the game subverts your expectations. It has a pretty generic desert level at the beginning, yes, but in the later stages moves to ruins, desert caves, and an ancient alien's UFO. If you pay attention when playing through, you'll actually see the same pattern throughout all the worlds. The first stage always starts off with a pretty cookie-cutter level from what the world is based on, but in later levels ends up trailing off into different but still somewhat relevant environments. For example, the jungle level transitioning into a volcanic lava area at the end is very seamless. Even the snow world turning into a factory makes sense. Factories give off this feeling of coldness that fits with the rest of the world. And this is something that makes Crystal Shards really unique. I don't see many other games try this. Usually whenever platforming games enter an area's setting, that setting is either used 100% of the time and never trails off from it, making it feel like I'm not progressing through anything, or it's just discarded to a point where the area setting might as well not even be there. It might as well be a black background. Nothing ever feels recycled or lazy when it comes to Crystal Shards worlds and their visuals. The only world where the stages feel samey is the water world. But even then, they're able to change it up decently with beaches, a more tropical area with really nice cave, and an ocean. This is a huge accomplishment because water is fucking boring.
Oh, fuck.
And it's nearly impossible to make it interesting in games. So the fact that playing through it isn't painful and actually has some great moments is amazing. Whenever I think fondly of this game, it usually comes from thinking about how beautiful the visuals were. Fuck! And the music. I mean, holy moly is the soundtrack good. It's full of hyper BPMs and insane arpeggios in the back of most songs. It's surprisingly equally as effective when it slows down with tracks like Quiet Forest, too. This is one of the few soundtracks where everything is memorable. The second I hear a song from this game, I immediately know what stage it plays in. After finishing a level, you get to play a little bonus game where you wind up what direction you'll go, followed by how far you'll jump. My favorite thing to aim for are these little cards, which you can view on the main menu. You can see the models and some slight info about the enemies, and it's a fun little addition to the game. At the end of every world, per usual of most platforming games, you have to fight a boss. They're usually related to what the planet transitions into during the later levels. Like the forest area I mentioned before is a big scary face lava monster. This is really smart because it keeps the flow going. If I went from getting pelted with volcanic debris and staring constantly at lava to having some dude throw spears at me in the jungle going, "Ugh," I'd be so pissed and I'd turn the game off. There's some really great boss battles throughout the game, and I always look forward to playing them. I love these little cubes on Rockstar, and the stage constantly rising and turning while the cubes try to hit Kirby. The Wispy Woods fight is also fantastic, and they did a great job of getting this fight to work in this 3D visual style. There's one boss I really don't appreciate fighting though, and that's this orca. It reminds me of SeaWorld and their rude treatment of their aquatic animal life. I learned yesterday that orcas have their little dorsal fins slanted when they're at SeaWorld because they're sad. I also love how after beating a boss, you're treated to a nice cutscene with Kirby and his friends where they're generally doing something fun and lighthearted, like chilling at the beach or calling the police on some minorities. They always end with everyone jumping into a little portal to the next world. It's a nice transition, and I really appreciate the extra effort they put into it. They even have completely original music during all of these too. Generally, Kirby games have collectibles for people that want to get 100%. It's a great way of making something rewarding for a more hardcore audience, and Crystal Shards is no different. Every stage has 3 shards you have to get to unlock the real ending of the game. I do enjoy collecting these for every playthrough of the game I do, but they do get a bit tedious. Once the game gets going, you start noticing that you need certain powers to break through objects so you can obtain shards. This is the worst thing about the game to me, as it also damages the combining feature. The game wants to promote trying out a lot of new abilities and seeing all the silly and fun powers Kirby gets, but it's hard to do that when I have to go through the whole stage with just 1 power so I can get 1 shard. And if I want to get that juicy 100% and I get to an area I can't break because I don't have the right power, I now have to exit the level, exit the world I'm in, go across the whole galaxy, enter Popstar, enter the Quiet Forest so I can get this 1 combination, get it, exit the level again, exit the world again, go all the way back to the stage I need to go to and play the level over. Ah, fuck, I lost my power! Now I have to exit the stage again, exit the world, go across the whole fucking solar system, enter Popstar, go into Quiet Forest, fuck! Exit the stage with my fucking Asian combination, start hauling dick across the galaxy, enter the stage, play through it super careful and don't drop the meatballs until I can finally break the fucking structure. Now some of this is avoided because the stages will usually end up having the power combo you need to get that shard, but there are a couple where they don't have the power I need in them, and I have no idea why they'd leave those enemies out of the stage other than to artificially pad out the game's playtime. I think I get it. Not to mention, doing all the extra effort to collect the shards only gets you roughly 4 extra minutes of gameplay. It's a 1-minute stage with a boss that's actually easier than the one you fought on Ripple Star. And while I do appreciate the original assets and the rail shooter gameplay during the final boss, I just wish it could be a little longer considering what I had to do to get there. These shards bog the game down, and I hate saying that too, because I honestly think they really put this game together almost perfectly. This is the only huge glaring issue that I feel isn't just a personal preference, and it just upsets me that it's there. Every other aspect of the shards is done great. I think the ones where your friend Adeline paints something and you have to copy it in the following room, I think those are great. They always put a twist on it whenever the shards come up also, and I think that they're just always really fun to do. I just wish the game had more unique ways of getting shards like this. Even with the issues though, this game is so comfy. It just reeks of joy, and I feel like it really wants me to have a lot of fun. It's so cute and happy it fills my arteries with cholesterol. In the first world, you make a friend at the end of every level, and you all go on fun adventures through clouds and toy factories. Even my main enemy of the whole series, DDD, is my buddy. And you know what? 9/11 didn't even happen. North Korea is now a constitutional democracy where everyone has freedom of information, and In-N-Out have finally dropped their prejudices and are now opening chains nationwide. I think that if you're okay with the game being more slow-paced than others in the series, then you'll really like this game. People really overlook it just because it's easy and a bit short, but I can guarantee you it'll bring a smile to your face at least once, whether it be from the music or the great visuals, or just the silly enemy animations when you carry them. I wouldn't recommend this game to people who are insecure about their sexuality though, or people who have done coke recently. No one really knows where Sushi Shimamura is after he stopped working at HAL. There's actually a decent amount of people who suspect he might have died. My sources of that of course being Blazing Kirby's 2 and W Chodrat on GameFAQs. Not even this Kirby fan site knows much about him. No one even has a picture of the guy, which is a little weird because I do, but no one else does. Now I would think the stuff about him being dead is bullshit, but hold on to your horses, because I turned on my N64 and my game data was gone. It freaked me out a little because I thought I had something to do with that guy. I thought I was going to be in one of those stories where Link was going to show up and be Chinese. No one has really been able to confirm that though. Most likely he just left the company and worked somewhere where his name isn't going to be on the internet all the time. If he really did die, there'd be something to indicate it, like papers or some shit. This guy wasn't a nobody, I mean he directed 3 games. If he died, HAL would have said something to acknowledge it. No matter what happened though, the games he worked on for HAL were ripe with charm and ambience, and I think Crystal Shards was an amazing conclusion to his original work. It resonates with me and always makes me feel so joyful, and I'm sure I'm gonna find myself playing through it again in the future.